What if there was a diagram drawn thousands of years ago that perfectly maps every emotion, decision, and struggle you have ever had? Not a vague spiritual metaphor, not a poetic concept, an actual diagram, a living architecture, a map so precise, so detailed, so mercilessly accurate that when you finally see your own life drawn on it, you will feel, for the first time in a very long time, that nothing about you is broken, nothing about you is random, and nothing about you is beyond healing. This is not an accident that you are watching right now. You found this video at this exact moment because something in you is already searching for this. That restlessness. You carry the sense that you have tried many things and still something is not quite right. That is not a flaw. That is a compass. And today, we are going to learn how to read it. My name is Rabbi Elias Morgenstern. I am 79 years old, and I have spent more than 50 years studying the mystical traditions of Jewish wisdom. I have sat with texts that most people will never read, in libraries that most people will never enter. And I have wrestled with the same questions you are carrying right now. Why am I like this? Why do I keep repeating the same patterns? Why does it feel like something fundamental is out of alignment, like the person I show the world and the person I am alone in the dark are two completely different souls? Why does prayer help some mornings and feel hollow on others? Why can I extend grace to strangers and withhold it from myself? I am 79 years old, and I still ask those questions. The difference is that I now have a map, and in the next 45 minutes, I am going to give it to you. But first, if this video is speaking to something deep in you, if some part of you already recognizes what I am saying, before I have fully said it, I want you to like this video right now and leave a comment below with the words, "I am rooted and rising." That is your declaration for today. It is the map's central promise. It means that no matter how far you have wandered from yourself, you are grounded in something ancient, and you are already moving upward toward the life you were created to live. Subscribe to this channel and tap the bell so that these teachings keep finding you when you need them most. Now, let us talk about what has really brought you here. You are tired. Not just physically tired, though that is real enough. You are tired in a way that sleep cannot fix and caffeine cannot address and a good weekend cannot resolve. You are tired of waking at 3 a.m. with a weight on your chest that has no single name. You are tired of looking at your own life and feeling that something fundamental is missing. But you cannot say precisely what. You are tired of loving people well and still feeling alone inside that love. Tired of working hard and still feeling like you are running on empty. Tired of making real progress in one area of your life, only to watch another area quietly fall apart while you were looking elsewhere. Are you tired of feeling at war with yourself, the part of you that wants to be generous and the part of you that is running out of something to give? Have you ever wondered why the same fear keeps surfacing? No matter how much therapy or prayer or effort you apply to it, do you feel somewhere beneath the surface of your competent daily life that there is a version of you whole, clear, fully alive, fully integrated that you cannot quite reach, that slips away every time you think you are finally getting close? I hear you. And what I am about to tell you is this: the map exists. It has always existed. It was drawn in the shape of your own soul before you had a name, and you are about to see your life inside it. The diagram I am speaking about is called the Etz Chaim. In Hebrew, those two words mean the tree of life. This phrase appears in the book of Genesis, where the tree of life stands at the very center of the Garden of Eden, not at the edge, not in a corner, But at the center, in the mystical tradition of Kabbalah, this was not accidental. The ancient teachers read that placement as a clue. The tree of life, they said, is not something outside of you in a distant garden. It is the center of you. It is the structural architecture of the human soul. The foundational mystical text where the word Sefirot, the Hebrew word for the 10 divine channels of the tree, first appears, is a remarkable ancient book called the Sefer Yetzirah, which translates as the Book of Formation or the Book of Creation. Scholars who have analyzed its language date its composition to somewhere between the 3rd and 6th centuries of the Common Era, making it among the earliest surviving works of Jewish esotericism, though the tradition it draws from reaches further back still. The Sefer Yetzirah describes creation itself as having been structured through 32 pathways of wisdom, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, plus 10 Sefirot, 10 channels or emanations through which divine energy flows. 10. Hold that number in your mind. Over the following centuries, the masters of the Kabbalistic tradition, particularly those working in the south of France in the 12th century, and later in the great mystical schools of Spain, took that ancient framework and drew it into a visual diagram that would be studied, meditated on, and used as a tool for inner transformation for nearly 1,000 years. They called it the Tree of Life, and they said it contains 10 Sefirot, 10 spheres or nodes, each one representing a specific quality of both the divine and the human soul. 10 qualities, not 10 commandments to obey, not 10 virtues to perform, 10 living aspects of who you already are. 10 rooms in the house of your own soul, each one with a name, each one with a function, each one with a shadow, and each one with a path back to wholeness. This is what makes the Tree of Life different from every other framework you may have encountered for understanding yourself. The tree does not tell you what you should become. It shows you what you already are. Every single node on this map corresponds to something you have personally felt, struggled with, celebrated, or suppressed. The tree does not describe a perfect, enlightened being. It describes a human being in all their complexity, their contradiction, their capacity for both profound love and profound self-destruction. It describes you. Let me walk you through it carefully. Stay with me, because by the time we have traveled the full length of this tree together, you will never see your emotional life the same way again. The tree is arranged in 3 vertical columns, 3 pillars. The right column is called the pillar of mercy. The left column is called the pillar of severity. And the column running straight through the center, through the heart of the tree, is called the pillar of balance. Sometimes the middle pillar or the pillar of equilibrium, right from the very beginning, before we have named a single sphere. The tree is already teaching you something radical about yourself. You are not supposed to be only one thing. You are a being designed to hold opposites simultaneously. The tension inside you between wanting to give everything and needing to keep something for yourself. Between wanting to expand and needing to protect yourself. Between the compassion that wants to include everyone and the discernment that must sometimes say no. That tension is not a malfunction. That tension is design. It is sacred. The middle path between those 2 pillars is not the absence of tension. It is the integration of it. Now let us name the 10 Sefirot, because these names carry weight. They are not labels stuck onto concepts. They are living descriptions of the different qualities of consciousness that exist inside every human soul. At the very top of the tree sits Keter. The word means crown. Keter is your point of pure divine connection, the place in you that exists before language, before memory, before the construction of identity. It is the part of you that sometimes, in a moment of absolute stillness, feels the presence of something vast and benevolent and luminous holding you, something that has nothing to do with your performance, your accomplishments, your failures, or your fears. It is the part of you that simply is, without needing to justify that being. You cannot think your way to Keter. You cannot earn your way to Keter. You can only receive it. In the moments when you are still enough to let it come, many of us spend our entire lives unconsciously longing to return to that state, that original, wordless sense of being completely known and completely welcome. Just below Keter, on the right side of the tree, sits Chokhmah. The word means wisdom, but not the wisdom accumulated through years of study or experience. Chokhmah is the wisdom that arrives in a flash, the sudden knowing, the intuition that bypasses rational analysis entirely, the moment of insight that appears fully formed before you can explain it or defend it. When you have ever felt a deep knowing about something without being able to justify it logically, when you have understood something before you had the words for it, you have touched Chokhmah. It is the spark, the initial point of light, directly across from Chokhmah, on the left side of the tree. Sits Bina, the word means understanding, and where Chokhmah is the lightning strike of insight, instantaneous, undivided. Whole Binah is the deep, patient, generative work of comprehension. Bina receives the flash of Chokhmah and gives it form. She takes the spark and nurtures it into something that can sustain itself. Bina is the part of you that can hold grief with dignity rather than rushing through it. She is the part that honors complexity, that does not collapse under ambiguity, that understands that real wisdom must be held in the womb of understanding before it is ready to be born into the world. She is described in the tradition as the great mother of the entire tree. Below these three uppermost Sefirot, Keter, Chokhmah, and Bina, which together represent the intellectual and spiritual architecture of the soul, the tree opens into the world of emotion. And this is where most of us spend most of our lives. This is the territory that most needs naming. On the right side of the emotional level sits Hesed. The word means loving kindness, or sometimes simply love, or grace. Chesed is your capacity for generosity without conditions, the impulse in you that wants to give, to include, to open, to shelter, to embrace without reservation. When Chesed is flowing freely in you, you feel genuinely warm toward others, open-handed, expansive, abundant, capable of grace. You are the person others feel safe around. When Hesed is blocked or wounded, you experience the collapse of that generosity, the exhaustion of someone who has given too much for too long, the resentment of always being the one who shows up, or the fear that if you open yourself completely, you will be consumed. Directly across from Chesed on the left side of the tree sits Gevura. The word means strength, and it carries associations with judgment, discipline, and sacred boundaries. Gevura is the Sephirah of holy restriction, the capacity to say no when no is the most loving answer, to discern between what serves and what harms, to protect what is precious by limiting who and what has access to it. Where Chesed expands, Gevura defines. Where Chesed gives without measure, Gevura gives with intention. When Gevura is healthy in you, you have self-respect. You have the ability to establish limits without guilt. You do not let your compassion become a revolving door through which others drain you endlessly. When Gevura is distorted, it curdles into harshness, the inner critic that never rests, the perfectionism that never allows arrival, the coldness that mistakes distance for strength, or the rigidity that mistakes control for safety. And when Gevura collapses entirely, when it has been shamed out of you by early experiences that punished you for having needs or taking up space, you lose your spine. You lose the sacred no. You become someone who says yes to everything and is quietly destroyed by it. Listen to me carefully. Most of the chronic suffering in your emotional life, most of it can be traced to an imbalance between Hesed and Gevura. Too much giving. Not enough protecting yourself. Too much self-discipline. Not enough mercy toward your own humanness. Too much judgment of yourself or of others, and not enough grace. Too much expansion and not enough definition. The tree is showing you, in its very architecture, that both Hesed and Gevura are sacred. Both are divine attributes. Neither is meant to dominate the other. The war inside you, between your compassion and your need for boundaries, is not a character flaw. It is a structural imbalance, and it has a structural solution, which brings us to the sphere that sits at the very center of the entire tree. The heart of the diagram. This is the Sefirot called Tiferet. The word means beauty, or harmony, or compassion, and in many translations, simply the radiant truth of a thing fully realized. Tiferet is the integration point, the place where Hesed and Gevura do not cancel each other out, but are reconciled into something greater than either alone, a compassion that has shape, a boundary that has warmth, a self that is both giving and intact. And it is positioned in the diagram, precisely where your physical heart is located when the tree is mapped onto the human body. Tiferet is the authentic self, not the self you have constructed to be safe, not the self shaped by your wounds or your family's unspoken rules or your culture's definitions of success. The authentic self, the one that knows itself as simultaneously fully human and fully connected to something divine. The Kabbalistic tradition describes Tiferet as the meeting point between the world above and the world below. It is the bridge between heaven and earth, between the infinite and the finite, between the spiritual crown at the top of the tree and the physical world at the bottom. And this bridge is not located in a temple or a sacred text or a distant mountain. It is located in the center of you, right here, in the chest, in the place where you feel love most strongly, where you feel grief most deeply, where you feel, in your most honest moments, the weight and the beauty of being alive. When you are living from Tiferet, from your authentic center, everything else seems to come into alignment. You feel simultaneously grounded and elevated. You are compassionate without being depleted. You are clear without being cold. You are humble without being self-erasing. You can hold your own perspective and remain genuinely curious about someone else's at the same time. That feeling when you have touched it, even briefly, even for a moment, is not a coincidence. That is what it feels like to inhabit the center of your own tree. That is what it means to be yourself, without apology and without arrogance. Most of us have lost our way back to it. And the reason is not weakness. The reason is that no one gave us the map. Continuing down the tree, below Tiferet, we encounter 3 more Sefirot that govern how the energy of the soul moves outward into action and relationship. On the right side sits Netzach, which carries the meaning of endurance, victory, or eternity. Netzach is the Sefirah of passion, persistence, desire, creative force, and emotional instinct. It is the part of you that burns with longing. Point 250. The deep desire that will not be domesticated, the creative energy that needs expression or it will find its way out through less constructive channels. When you feel genuinely inspired, when you fall fully in love, when you become so absorbed in a creative project that hours disappear, when a piece of music or a landscape or a story breaks something open in you, that is Netzach. That is your eternal nature touching the present moment. Netzach is also where your relationship with beauty lives. Your instinctual responses, your gut wisdom, the knowledge of the body that the mind has not caught up with yet. Across from Netzach on the left side sits Hod, which means splendor or glory. Hod is the refined, articulate, communicative expression of what Netzach feels, where Netzach burns. Hod illuminates, where Netzach is raw and immediate. Hod is crafted and precise. Hod is the part of you that finds the right words for the feeling, that can write the letter that actually reaches someone, that can take an overwhelming emotional experience and translate it into something another human being can receive. Netzach and Hod working together give you your full creative and relational range, the capacity to feel deeply and to express that depth with skill and intentionality. Below these two sits Yesod, whose name means foundation. Yesod is the great channel of the tree, the Sefirot, through which all the energy of the upper spheres must pass before it can manifest in the world. Yesod governs connection, bonding, relationship, and the templates through which love is given and received. It is where your relational patterns live, your attachment style, the early lessons you absorbed about whether intimacy is safe, whether love is reliable, whether being fully known leads to belonging or to abandonment. Many of our deepest wounds are stored in Yesod, not because we are damaged, but because Yesod is the place where we first learn to reach outward for what we need. And those early experiences of reaching and what we found or did not find shape the patterns we still carry today. And at the very base of the tree, where the roots touch the earth, where all the spiritual energy of every Sefirah above it finally manifests in physical, tangible, lived reality, sits Malkuth. The word means kingdom. Malkuth is your physical existence, your body, your daily circumstances, your relationships as you actually experience them day to day, your finance, your home, your work. Malkuth is the world, not the world as an obstacle to your spiritual development. The world as the destination of your spiritual development, the place where everything the tree contains above it either flourishes or withers, depending on whether the energy is flowing freely or is blocked somewhere along the way. Pay attention to what I am saying now, because this is the teaching that most directly challenges what you have been told in many spiritual and religious traditions. The movement of the Tree of Life is not only upward, it is not a ladder you climb to escape your physical life. The energy flows downward from Keter to Malkuth, from the divine crown to the earthly kingdom, and it flows back upward again. These are not two separate movements. They are one living circulation. Like the blood in your body, like the water cycle of the earth, your physical life is not an interruption of your spiritual life. It is not a test to be endured so that you can eventually leave it behind for something more celestial. Your physical life is the place where the spiritual becomes real. Malkuth is where love is not just contemplated but practiced, where wisdom is not just held but applied, where beauty is not just perceived but made with the work of human hands. This is why this ancient diagram is called the Tree of Life, not the Tree of Transcendence, not the Tree of Escape from the physical, the Tree of Life, rooted in the earth, reaching to heaven, alive in both directions simultaneously. Now, I want to speak honestly about what goes wrong, because if you are here, Something in this circulation has become disrupted. And the tree names that disruption precisely. The Kabbalistic tradition teaches that each Sephira has a shadow state. What happens when the natural flow of energy through that sphere becomes blocked, distorted, or severed from its relationships with the others? Keter's shadow is dissociation, the spiritual bypassing that uses transcendence to escape the difficulty of being embodied. Chokma's shadow is arrogance, the flash of insight mistaken for complete understanding. The impulse that acts without comprehension. Bina's shadow is depression, when the capacity to hold complexity curdles into the inability to move. When understanding becomes paralysis. Hesed's shadow is codependency, the generosity that has become compulsive, the giving that is really a strategy for being needed, the love that enables rather than empowers. Gevura's shadow is cruelty, both the cruelty directed outward in judgment and condemnation, and the cruelty directed inward in the relentless self-criticism that tells you that you are never quite enough. Tiferet's shadow is inauthenticity, the performance of self. The constructed persona worn so consistently and so long that the real face underneath has become a stranger even to its owner. Netzach's shadow is compulsion and addiction, the desire that has escaped its proper relationship with the other Sefirot and become a tyrant rather than a gift. Hod's shadow is deception, the brilliant communicator who has lost contact with what is true. The person who can argue anything, but has forgotten what they actually believe. Yesad's shadow is the wound of disconnection, the profound loneliness that lives inside even a full social life, the inability to let anyone close enough to actually reach you. And Malkuth's shadow is the life unlived, the person so caught in survival mode, so embedded in pure reaction to the physical world, that they never lift their eyes to the rest of the tree. Do you recognize yourself in any of those shadows? Of course you do. We all do. Because we are all living, in some measure, in the shadow of one or more of our Sefirot. Not because we are broken, not because we have failed, but because we were never given this map. We were given morality. We were given aspiration. We were given religious instruction and self-help principles and social expectations. But we were not given a living architectural diagram of the interior of our own souls, one that names every quality we possess, honors both its light and its shadow, and shows us how the different parts of us are meant to relate to each other in the service of a whole and flowing life. That is what we are doing right now. Are you starting to feel it? Is something in you recognizing what it sees? Is there a sense of recognition, not of something new being added to you, but of something already present being named for the first time? Good. Because the recognition is where the restoration begins. Now, I want to give you a set of practices, specific, grounded, applicable practices rooted in different Sefirot of the tree, because this wisdom was never meant to be contemplated from a distance. The teachers who developed and preserved this system across centuries of difficult history intended it to be lived. They intended it to change not just what you understand about yourself, but what you actually do, how you actually move through your days, what you reach for when you are afraid, and what you return to when you have lost your way. The first practice is the practice of Keter. I call it returning to the original silence. You will do this once a day in the morning or the evening, and it will take no more than 5 minutes. You find a moment when you are alone, truly alone, not surrounded by the noise of other people's needs or your own internal narration, and you do one thing. You stop performing. You stop narrating your own experience to yourself. You stop planning the next step, assessing today's progress, rehearsing tomorrow's challenges, worrying about what you said last Thursday. You release all of it, and you sit in complete stillness for exactly 5 minutes. No prayer with words. No affirmation. No visualization of your goals. No spiritual achievement to pursue. Just the silence. Just the raw fact of your own existence. Unmediated by interpretation. This is much harder than it sounds, because many of us carry a deep terror of the silence. A fear that if we stop moving, stop producing, stop performing even internally, we will discover that there is nothing there, that we are hollow, that we are not enough, that the silence will be a kind of condemnation. But the practice of Keter teaches you something true. The silence is not empty. The silence is full. It is full of the original you, the you that existed before the wounds were received, before the conditioning was absorbed, before the fear was learned. That 5 minutes every day, without agenda, is how you begin to rebuild your relationship with the deepest dimension of your own soul. You are not trying to achieve anything in those 5 minutes. You are simply letting something find you that has been waiting. The second practice is the practice of Hesed and Gevurah together. I call it the honest audit. Once a week, not daily. Because this work needs space around it, you sit with a piece of paper and you draw a line down the center of the page. On one side you write Chesed. On the other side you write Gevurah. And you ask yourself the two most honest questions of the week. The Chesed question is, where in my life am I giving from fear rather than from abundance? Where is my generosity actually a performance of worthiness, a way of earning approval? Avoiding conflict, or preventing abandonment? Where am I saying yes when my deeper self is trying to say no? Where have I told myself that my giving is love, when in fact it is a strategy for survival? The Gevurah question is, where in my life am I withholding from fear rather than from wisdom? Where have I built walls and called them boundaries? Where am I being hard on myself and calling it accountability? Where am I holding back something beautiful, a vulnerability, an offer of help, a true expression of what I feel? Because the fear of rejection is louder than the impulse toward connection. You write your honest answers. You do not judge them. You do not immediately try to fix them. You do not make promises to yourself about how you will be different. You simply see them. You bring the witnessing quality of Tiferet, the compassionate, undefended center, into relationship with what Hesed and Gevurah are telling you. And you say, I see you. I see where the balance has been lost. I am not afraid of what I see. And I am not in a hurry to make it go away. That seeing honest, unhurried, non-punitive is itself healing. Not because it magically dissolves the pattern in an instant, but because you cannot move toward what you are not willing to look at. The audit is the look. The third practice is the practice of Tiferet. I call it the authentic question. Every morning, before you interact with another human being, before you check your messages, before the world begins making its claims on you, you ask yourself one question. Not the question you think you are supposed to ask. Not a spiritually impressive question. The real question, the one that is actually alive in you on that particular morning. The one you would never say out loud because it feels too vulnerable or too petty or too exposing. It might be, what am I actually afraid of today? Underneath the schedule, or what do I genuinely want? Underneath what I have told myself I want, or who was I yesterday? And am I becoming someone different? And are those two people in conflict with each other right now? Or simply, what is true this morning? You do not need to answer it completely. You do not need to resolve it. You only need to ask it honestly. Because Tiferet, the authentic center, is not reached through spiritual performance. It is reached through the willingness to tell yourself the truth before you have time to construct something more flattering. The practice of the authentic question trains that willingness daily. You are building the muscle of your own authenticity. One honest question at a time. Ask it every morning. Write it down if that helps the honesty go deeper. Say it aloud to yourself in the mirror if you have the courage for that. Because saying things aloud to your own face is a different experience than thinking them privately. And Tiferet responds to the act of actually showing up to yourself. The practice is not finding the perfect answer. The practice is refusing to live unexamined. The fourth practice is the practice of Yesod. I call it the conscious connection ritual. Yesod governs your relational patterns, the templates through which you give and receive connection. And because so many of us carry wounds in Yesod, we have developed sophisticated strategies for being in the presence of others without actually being reached by them. We are present but not available. We engage but do not expose. We share but not the real thing. The Yesod practice is this once a week. You deliberately let someone see something true about you that you would normally edit. Not a dramatic confession, not a manufactured vulnerability designed to create intimacy. Something small and real. You tell a friend that you are genuinely struggling with something you have been pretending is fine. You thank someone specifically for something they did that actually mattered to you, instead of the generic gratitude you usually offer. You admit to someone you respect that you do not know the answer to something you have been performing certainty about. You say, "I miss you," to someone you have been keeping at a careful distance. Small, true, unperformed. That is the Yesod practice. And the reason it matters is that Yesod, when it begins to open, when the relational channel begins to clear, tends to open everything else. Because you are not designed to carry the full weight of your own interior life in isolation. The tree of life is a living system. Energy moves between the Sefirot. It does not stay in one sphere. And the energy of your authentic inner life needs to move through Yesod, through genuine connection into relationship with other souls. That movement is not weakness. It is the tree functioning as it was designed to function. The fifth practice is the practice of Malkuth. I call it the embodied blessing. Once a day, you physically acknowledge the miracle of your physical existence. You go outside and stand on actual ground. You feel the surface beneath your feet, earth or concrete or grass, whatever you have access to. You take 3 slow, deliberate breaths. And with each breath, you say silently or aloud 1 sentence. The first breath, I am here. The second breath, this body is the vessel of my spirit and I am grateful for it. The third breath, my life in the physical world is the purpose of my spiritual journey, not the obstacle to it. 3 breaths, 3 sentences, 1 minute of your day. That is the Malkuth practice. You are completing the circuit of the tree, reaching your awareness from the crown all the way down to the roots. Honoring the earthly kingdom as sacred. Reminding yourself that the purpose of all this inner work is not to leave your life behind, but to inhabit it more fully, more presently, more alive. 5 practices. 1 for each primary dimension of the tree we have worked with today. Keter in the daily silence. Hesed and Gevurah in the weekly honest audit. Tiferet in the morning authentic question. Yesod in the weekly conscious connection. Malkuth in the daily embodied blessing. You do not start all 5 tomorrow. You choose one. The one that feels most necessary. The one that corresponds to the dimension of your life where you are most out of flow. You begin there, and you practice it consistently for 2 weeks before you add another. The tree does not grow all at once. It grows steadily, organically, from root to crown, one season at a time. And I want to tell you something, the teachers who gave me this wisdom made sure I understood. The fact that you are blocked somewhere on the tree is not evidence of spiritual failure. It is evidence that energy is gathering, waiting for the channel to open. A blocked Sefirot is not a dead Sefirot. It is a Sefirot that is full of experience, full of pain, full of grief or fear or longing that has not yet been able to move through. And when the channel opens, when that accumulated energy is finally named and honored and allowed to flow, the restoration is not gradual. It is remarkable. It is the kind of shift that people describe as waking up, as finally arriving in their own lives. That is what is available to you. Not perfection, not a life without difficulty, but a life in which you are actually present for your own experience. Navigating with intention instead of stumbling through the dark. A life in which the different rooms of your soul are in conversation with each other instead of at war. A life that is genuinely, recognizably, unmistakably yours. Now, I want to speak directly into the life of someone watching this. You have been watching this whole video, and there is a part of you that is still withholding, still deciding whether this can be for you, still calculating whether you are too far gone, too set in your patterns, too old or too young or too broken or too busy. That part of you is not your enemy. That part of you has been trying to protect you for a very long time. And it deserves compassion. Not dismissal, but it needs to hear what I am about to say. You have been told, somewhere along the way, through words, through silences, through the reactions of people who were supposed to reflect you back to yourself with love, that your full self is too much, too intense, too sensitive, too complicated, too needy, too something. And you believed it, because you were young when you received that message. And the people who delivered it were the only reference point you had for reality. And so you made yourself smaller. You edited yourself. You learned to lead with the parts of yourself that were acceptable and hide the parts that were not. And now, years later, you are doing well by most external measures. You show up, you contribute, you take care of people, you make things work. But you feel the gap between the life you have constructed and the life you were actually designed for. Between the person you show the world and the person who looks back at you in the mirror at 7 a.m. before you have put anything on, the Tree of Life does not ask you to tear down what you have built. It asks you to stop confusing the construction for the reality. The constructed self is not wrong. It has served you, but it is not the tree. It is scaffolding around the tree, and the tree wants to grow. Your complexity is not a disorder. Your contradictions are not failures of character. Your depth of feeling the way things move through you, more profoundly than they seem to move through others. The way you carry other people's pain without being asked. The way beauty and loss sometimes feel almost the same. These are not symptoms of something wrong with you. These are signs that you have a full, living, deeply rooted tree inside you. A soul genuinely engaged with the difficulty and the splendor of being human. The shadows you carry exist precisely because there is light in you worth casting them. Someone watching this right now knows, in the most private and protected chamber of their interior life, that this is for them. You have circled the edge of this understanding before in a conversation that went deeper than you expected, in a prayer that suddenly felt real, in a moment alone in nature when something vast and kind seemed to look back at you. You have touched the branches of this tree without knowing what you were touching. And every time, something in you recognized it and wanted to stay. And something else in you was afraid of what staying would require. This is the moment you stay. Not because the path gets easier from here. It does not, necessarily, but because you now have a name for the territory. You have a map. And with a map, even the difficult terrain becomes navigable. Even the darkness becomes oriented. Even the parts of your soul that have felt most alien and most frightening begin to reveal themselves as rooms in a house you were always meant to inhabit. You are not lost. You are between Sefirot. You are in the movement between one aspect of yourself and another. And the tradition calls that movement a path, one of the 22 sacred paths of the tree. Each one a passage between two nodes. Each one a spiritual experience in its own right. You are on the path. The path is not the absence of the destination. The path is the journey toward it. And you are moving. So let me close with a practical invitation. In the next 7 days, take out a notebook or a piece of paper, or your phone, whatever you have, and write down the name of the one area of your life where you feel most blocked right now. Not the most dramatic, not the most painful necessarily. The one where you feel most frozen, most confused, most unable to see your way forward clearly. And then sit with this question. Which dimension of the tree does this belong to? Is this a Hesed wound, the exhaustion of giving without receiving, the generosity that has crossed the line into self-abandonment? Is this a Gevura wound, the inner critic that has become a tyrant, the perfectionism that makes every step feel inadequate, the walls that were built for protection and became a prison? Is this a Tiferet wound, the loss of your own center, the performance of a self that no longer feels like yours? Is this a Yesod wound, the relational fear that true connection always ends in loss, the loneliness that persists even in the middle of a full life? Is this a Malkuth wound, the inability to land, to be present in your own body and your own daily existence? The feeling of always being slightly outside of your own life. You do not need to solve it this week. You need to locate it, because the moment you can say, I know which part of the map this lives on, you have already taken the first step on the path that leads through it. You have turned on the light in that room. And in the light, nothing is as it seemed in the dark. Before you go, I want to ask you one more time, leave a comment below with the words, I am rooted and rising. Say it as a declaration. Say it as a claim on what the tree holds for you. Even if you are not sure you believe it yet, especially if you are not sure you believe it yet, say it. Because the tradition teaches that declaration precedes experience, that speaking the truth of what you are becoming is part of how you become it. The declaration is a seed, and seeds grow in the dark before they emerge in the light. Share this video with one person in your life who you know is quietly wrestling with the same questions you are wrestling with. You do not have to explain why. Simply send it. Let the tree find the people it is looking for. And if you are ready to go deeper to explore each Sefirah in its own full teaching, to understand the 22 paths between them, to discover how the tradition applies this map to relationships and work and prayer and grief and creativity, subscribe to this channel. This is where we will go together. Let me leave you now with a blessing drawn from the roots and the crown of this ancient tradition. May the silence at the top of your own tree grow more familiar and less frightening. And may you visit it every day. May the wisdom that arrives in flashes be received with courage rather than dismissed with doubt. May the understanding that requires time be given the time it needs. May your capacity for love expand in all directions without losing the shape that keeps it from being consumed. May your capacity for sacred limits be held with warmth rather than wielded with judgment. May you find your way back to the center of your own tree, to that place of beauty and honesty and authentic, unperformed self, again and again and again, as many times as you need to, for the rest of your living days. You are rooted, you are rising, and this, I promise you with everything in me, is only the beginning.